The Center for Educational Media and the College of Education at Middle Tennessee State University are proud to offer professional development to K-12 teachers in Tennessee through our online video library. These videos are aligned with the Tennessee academic standards. For more professional development videos, check out our website at cem.mtsu.edu. This video is aligned with the following Tennessee academic standards.
So the easiest way to get there, just go to Google and type in College Ready Writers Program.
Or just CRWP, it comes up top.
CRWP does? Excellent. So Google CRWP or College Ready Writers Program. There are several versions of the site out there right now. They're working to fix that. But if what I always do just to make sure that I'm on the right site, I click on Home. And if I'm on the wrong site, it will take me, it'll have directions on the home page that will say this is an older version, and click here if you want to go to the newer version. That will always direct you to the newer site. And it looks like this. So you've got an overview of the program. You've got instructional resources, formative assessment tools. There's a special section on letters to the next president right now, which they're really trying to get students to write letters to the next president, and even after the election, it will still be relevant leading up to inauguration. So that would be another way to get students to write to a larger audience. And they publish the letters right on the site there, and that all of that's available. But there are also argument lessons, College Ready Writers Program argument lessons that can help teachers. Help students narrow down a topic and write a letter to the next president.
So which version of the site is this?
So just click on one.
Okay.
Yeah, click on that one. And it'll take you to the home page, and it should say on the home page if it's not the correct site. So if you, did you click on it?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. And it should say right there in the middle if it is the correct page or not, and if it's not, it will give you a link to the correct page. We've been making these ourselves on Google Docs or on Google Sites, and they have a company right now developing a site that everything will be transferred to. Yeah.
This is an older version. So it's under here. Okay.
Okay. There are professional development resources, but the main two tabs that I use frequently are the instructional resources, which will take you to routine argument, the mini units, and extended argument, and the formative assessment tools. So she had asked earlier about how do you grade this, the formative assessment. There are actually tools like how to grade student work, how to assess student work formatively using, focusing just on how they use sources. There's another one that below that, it's the claims, evidence, and reasoning tool, where you can actually assess students on how they connect their claims, their evidence, and their reasoning together within a piece. So there are multiple tools that way. Let's see.
The on-demand is really nice too, for practicing for that writing assessment that the kids take.
And that's been applicable like for larger like national ones, but then also like statewide assessments. It's, a lot of teachers in a lot of states have found that helpful.
Yeah, I
so
use it.
on-demand.
On-demand writing.
It's under instructional resources as well.
Right underneath mini units. And there's one that's on concussions that a lot of kids find very relevant.
And like my students love the wild horses one. There's a wild horses one. There's one on concussions.
You're gonna kill a tree. Just know that you're killing a tree.
Yeah. So there's, it's helpful because it gets students used to using like multi-text text sets to then construct an argument in a timed setting.
It's nice to follow one of the mini units though, where you kind of led them through that process.
So this is what it looks like in real world, and this is what it looks like when you get put in a situation where you're being tested to read things and like sort through multiple texts in order to come to an essay format where you have to construct an essay from that. So that's really helpful. I want to give time right now to allow you to click buttons and look around there, and as you have questions, please feel free to ask, and I'll help you any way I can. But I find with the workshopping process that I don't have very many instances of plagiarism.
Right.
Because if you start them in a like a mini unit, or you start them in one of these like
and
big
you go
projects,
through the free
right?
writing with them.
Yeah.
They've got all that.
And like one thing I found, and it came out in the study, that many in whether they were receiving professional development or they were not, okay, and this was true in Marshall County and Warren County. When they first received that first assessment, a lot of the students all across the country involved in the study didn't know how to use source material. And it made me think about my own classroom and all the frustrations I've had with plagiarism over the years. And I kind of had a light bulb go off and say, well, wait a second, maybe I'm having these issues because I'm assuming my students know how to use. And maybe like the old like style that I learned with the note cards and writing down your sources on note cards, and the flip side says something what they said. Maybe that didn't really teach me what to do, and there might be a different way to do that.
He did the Google form, and that's how his kids did peer feedback. And I use that, and I love that. I actually use that best year.
This might be relevant to everybody if I could get your attention for a second.
That's exactly where we are.
Talking about formative assessment.
The tools that are
Yeah, the tools. So someone at this table this morning asked, well, how do you grade that? Right? So you're doing this big project, how do you grade that? So if you're on the site and you clicked on formative assessment, that probably came up. There's the using sources tool, that's the one at the very top. That was developed through the study. One of the first things we had to do as part of this, it was written into the grant that students were going to be able to use sources effectively, comment on those sources, introduce the sources, build up the credibility of the sources. So we needed a formative assessment tool to measure where students were at and then measure that progress as they learned more about it. So this tool was very productive in the course of the study. And we started out with paper where we would have teachers come together with stacks of student samples, and maybe you were part of that in last year in Warren County if you taught in Warren County. But we started out with that on paper, and the teachers would go through their own student samples and actually mark one of these. It would be printed out. You'd have a stack of those, and you go through and mark and assess. Okay, this is what the student knows how to do, and this might be what they could work on. But then you could lay a bunch of those out. Like, let's say you have you've gone through and responded to a bunch of papers with this tool. You could get a feel for where your class was at. Well, with some of the study funding, they created a digital version of that. And then schools that were involved in for the target schools, the schools that were receiving professional development in that 2 years. beginning to the study, they could get printouts and get graphs of where their students were at and where they could go next. And that formative assessment was one of the 3 components. We had to create assessments that would help teachers identify where the students were at so they could identify which mini unit might be next. Or if the student didn't pick up the skill being taught with the mini unit, maybe you switch out the text set. So instead of reality TV for that first mini unit, maybe you teach the one on sports drinks instead. But the students think you're going on to something new, but you're actually reinforcing that same skill again to give them another opportunity to pick it up, right? So I loved the digital version because you could go through and assess a bunch, get the data back, and get to see what was next, right? You get to make decisions, and you could sit around a table and make those decisions. So I wanted to be able to do that, and it also occurred to me, I want my students to be able to do that. I want them to be able to see where they're at, or look at other people's papers and help them understand that. So peer response is always a tricky thing in classrooms too. So what I did was I started using Google Forms. So I'm already using Google Classroom, Google Docs, other formats. I started to use Google Forms where I could put in those same questions that are in that using sources tool. I mean, you could print out that using sources tool and use the language there and the answers, the responses there as the possible responses, multiple choice responses for the most part. But I could ask some of those same questions. So I started setting it up so I'd have students go through the first time with their peers. I'd ask them to read each other's papers at least 3 times. So this is with a mini unit argument that we're doing this with. And if I could get them to respond, so if each individual person has to get 3 responses on their paper, it kind of norms the group and makes sure that one person isn't throwing off the results for the class or one person. So if I could run it through 3 times, I could get data, and they can get individual data, like it'll form a Google Sheet with the raw data that I can sort by names. But then also it gives me a summary where I can look at what the class is able to do with that using sources tool, and I can make decisions on what to teach next. So like here, the first time through, I asked, do the body paragraphs mention the credibility of each source? 52.5% of my students were doing that very thoroughly. Like they were mentioning the credibility. Another 37.9 were somewhat doing that. And this is from just this first quarter, which ended yesterday. So this is what I do on every writing assignment now. We actually run it through a peer response Google form with these answers.
And those of us on Microsoft 365, our forms works the exact same way because I've done the same thing just on that form.
Okay.
Now what?
If you're using Office 365, forms through Office 365, you can set up the exact same type of questions and you get the same type of data. It's going to export to Excel and everything like he's talking about. It's just a different name.
Good to know.
Okay. And so what I do then is I pull this up on my screen and I coach my students, okay, if you received this response, here's your next action. I'm going to give you some time to revise, but if you receive this response, here's something you might want to think about doing. If you were told that you're not mentioning credibility at all, maybe that student was gone that day, maybe I need to reconnect with them. I've got the data from the form that I can identify which students were receiving that feedback. So if it's that, maybe I can go, oh, that person was gone. Maybe I need to get a couple of these people together over in the corner and reteach that. But then they go through some revision time. They come back and they exchange papers again. We run it through round 2. And then they get used to this. It builds in kind of we're all working toward really good arguments together, that community aspect. It builds up the culture of argument in the classroom. But they want to see the class grow. They want to see improvement as a group, as a whole. And so, right now you can see we went from 52.5 to 82.5% of the students had that really thorough development of the credibility. And now I've narrowed that window of who I need to talk to even more, and maybe I can move on, but still go back and have conversations with that specific group. And that's a question I take right out of that using sources tool in the formative assessments there. So if you're really needing ways to assess this work, those formative assessment tools can be helpful even as just a model that then if you want to go put that into it's Microsoft 365, yeah. Google Classroom, Google Forms, Edmodo with Google Forms up from your private account, something like that. It really helps me collect data and put that into play. And that's just something I'm doing for myself and for my class. I'm not having to report that to anybody else. I do give my students a little credit for peer response if they go through this. And I'm also giving credit, like full credit in a normal argument, just for like a revised draft. I give them credit for a beginning, because if they have a beginning, we have something to work with. If they have, if I can see that they've made an effort between these two, I'll give them full points for a revised draft. And then what lies out beyond that is a best draft. And we really work hard through the conferencing process to work it towards revise. But in a normal mini unit, there's a lot of times where I don't like specifically read every student's argument until we've run it through this twice. And it actually saves me a bunch of time, because they have a lot of the necessary parts that I would just be repeating myself over and over to say. But if I run it through this, where they're responding to each other, they're helping each other get to the point where they have really readable, structured arguments that have most of the necessary pieces. And then I can really work with them on their reasoning and their, like the organization and the argument that they're trying to make, rather than saying, oh, you really need to, you don't have a quote in here, get a quote in here. I don't have to repeat myself as much if we run through this. So that would be one way to look at that formative assessment tool. Yeah?
So you put in the results, did you, into this?
No, it's a form, so it's a survey, but then Google, and you can do this without Google Classroom.
Is it like multiple choice, or is it?
You can make them, I make them multiple choice because there's a difference between quantitative and qualitative data. So this is quantitative.
It all starts to fall apart for me, because I just think, multiple choice, and then we've got this data, and it just,
It's very
the
easy,
multiple
though.
choice is kind of like if you think about when you're thinking about mastery, strong, middle, weak. And
but
so
I think that I could tell that more. I mean, just by I'm looking at all of their stuff, but you're trying to take it away from. I mean, it's
No, it's coming to you ultimately,
or
but
is
it's
it-
also giving the kids a chance to see if they can recognize it.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get my students to the point where they can peer respond, okay? But I'm also modeling what peer response looks like, because I've constructed the possible answers. They get to they respond to each other. They get to like assess other people's writing, but I guarantee if somebody is like looking at that, building the credibility, as they're looking at somebody else's paper going, well, I guess they somewhat did it, but I guess I did too. So when I get my paper back, and I get that revision time, I really need to go address that. So having conversations about writing is what writers do. They get together and they have conversations in the real world about their writing, and they're able to help each other with that writing. And so when I do a piece of writing, in the modern context, I'm often using a Google Doc, and I'm sharing it with other writers that are kind of in my network to say, what do you think about this? Can you respond and give me some feedback? This gives them a structured way to start with that, and allows them to kind of borrow the possible answers that I've given them. I'm not trying to steal anything away from you as a teacher. What I do after this is I immediately start having sit-down conversations and going through and marking up papers with students.
That's what I would much prefer to do, is like the discussion with them about that. I just felt that if it's like my kids, if it's multiple choice, they'll just choose one, really don't care. If it's low stakes, they don't,
Well, you can also have them
and they don't give it any depth of thought. And
Part of it, though, the really important missing piece
I still don't think they think deeply.
is the culture, which starts further back from the very beginning with that routine argument, which they are invested. By the time we do this, my students, you can actively see them want to improve. And they know that they're among that wedge if they aren't at that spot. So when I call them over, they're like, okay, I don't get that. I got that response and I don't get it. And I'm like, okay, here's what we need to do, all right? Or you were gone that day, don't worry about it. Let's
All right, as long as we still got that I don't get it thing, that could you explain that to me?
Right, but what happens though is like, I need a tool to help me, like not just my subjective eye, but I do need a little bit of data to help me say, what does the class really look like? Like, do I think they understand it, but they really don't? Am I moving on too quickly, or does it look like most of them have this particular skill? Or do I need to reteach it with a new text set? Or, I mean, there's a lot of decisions that I can have to choose from, but if I'm informed with the actual data, and this is not like something somebody's forcing me to do, this is just something I'm doing, and my students know why I'm doing it. They know I'm making instructional choices based on what I see. But then I also have the follow-up of I'm sitting down with students in their papers and talking through with them, okay, okay? And like I'm asking them, hey, what kind of feedback did you get on that? Well, they said that I need to work on the credibility. I actually have 4 sources, but they told me I only had 2, so I don't know what to do with that. And so then we can talk about, well, if you don't name the source, or if you just said, an article said, but you were talking about a different article up here, are they thinking it's the same article? So how could you go about communicating to them that there's a difference? And maybe it's, well, what's the writer's name? Where was it published? You know, things like that, like having conversations with them about that. But they get feedback that then they can come to me with questions about why they got that feedback too. So it's a very dynamic process. Here's another one. After reading the writer's introduction, do you have a sense of the landscape of this argument? Do you understand the situation? Like that's getting it, like, did the writer give the proper context, like explain the situation about what the entire issue entails, or did they just jump into it and lose their reader? Like if your reader doesn't get what's up with why you needed to make this argument, you probably need to provide that information because you're responsible for your reader's ignorance.
I can see mine, they would be able to do 1 source, 2 source, that's a physical, factual thing. But get them to comment on somebody else's piece of writing, so to get them to read their own piece, once again, would be bad enough, but to get them to read somebody else's and then answer an in-depth, complex question on it, that's where I'm thinking, oh.
I'm going to tell you though right now that students will surprise us when we give them the opportunity.
Well, it goes back to how you built a culture slowly. This would not happen overnight by any means. It's where they've developed trust in you and each other, and it takes how long would you say it takes before you get into that?
So this happened during the quarter. I was probably 4 or 5 weeks into my quarter before that happened. But we were doing a lot of work preparing the culture to get to this point where they knew what a claim is. They know what I'm talking about when I say credibility. So when I ask them to go evaluate their peers' piece for credibility, and it's not like I'm not asking them to be me, but I'm asking them to know what credibility is, and as a reader, what impression do you get as you read this piece?
One thing I've also done to help my students be ready to tackle this kind of questionnaire is have them answer smaller things first about their peers' writing. So, we'll be doing a daily writing, and just can you go back and underline where they used evidence? And so that we're already getting used to somebody else is reading my stuff and somebody else is making comments about my stuff, and it's not just me and the teacher. Yeah.
But there's also like questions I ask them that I know that they're going to struggle with. And I see it like I've got 2 first graders and a 3rd grader in my house. So I get report cards from elementary, and I can see the same thing happening on their report cards, that they're working toward meeting a standard. They've achieved that standard in some place. They've achieved this standard, but they're working toward that standard here. So there are places where I go, okay, I'm going to hit that in the next unit, or I'm going to hit that in future instruction, so we can move beyond that, but I know where they're at now. But there's some things like this. In that very first mini unit, the reality TV, if you go to the mini units, you'll see making informal arguments with the reality TV text set. I expect them to be able to comment after a quote. It talks about the it says, I say. What does the text say? What do I have to say in response to that? That what do I have to say in response to that is the comment after the quote, right? If they can start to like see the relationship of and the structure of academic paragraphs, there is an introduction of a source. That source says something, and then what do I have to say, or how do I make sense of that, or how do I summarize that, or what argument do I form from that?
Why did I put this in here?
Right. Well, how does it relate to the claim I made earlier? But we spent a lot of time with it says I say. There should be comments after the quote, like a commentary in the structure of each paragraph after the quote. So I expect to see that, and sure enough, I've got 91.5% had that. But I can still say, okay, now, it looks like you guys did that really well. Hey, good job. I mean, we covered that, you did it, perfect. If you're in that red area, you might have missed that day. Let's talk. I'll look you up, we'll talk about it. But you're gonna wanna make sure that just as a general rule of thumb, that the paragraph ends with your words, not the quote. Okay? So that would be something to go revise right now and check. And so, the goal, and I'll even tell them, let's try to make a goal of hitting 100% here. And we got close. We hit 98.1%. So now I've got that one kid that I can sit down with and we can talk. And nobody else knows who that kid is, but I can find him and we can go have that conversation. Okay? So, I mean, there's a lot of, like, I think that's what you're trying to say, Leslie, there's like low impact questions, but then there's like really complex questions. I want them to be able to do both.
Right, and giving them some easy opportunities before you get to those more complex, because then they're confident.
How many sources does this paper have?
Right.
A lot of times in our writing, what we'll have them do if we're looking for those sources, as a writer, they're on paper, we'll have them to highlight in a certain color what those are, and that way when that person's peers looking at it, then they can kind of spot that, say, no, that's not a good example of that, or whatever.
But the important thing, I think, is to start the conversation. So by the time, now let's project to the community research project, students have had a semester with multiple arguments, constructing them, evaluating other students' arguments, evaluating like published arguments, you know, and it just keeps building this culture that it creates the conditions that by the beginning of fourth quarter, they're ready to write a really solid, well-reasoned argument that's like comes off really polished, and they're going to get responses from the community on, you know, that they get a chance to not just have information, they know how to do something, they actually go do it in a real world context. And I think that's the goal of the community research project, is to like give them the opportunity to now, you know, like in a sports analogy, like we've been practicing, let's actually be able to do this and go do it. So this extended argument that has the goal of actually publishing something allows them to actually go get in a game and make something happen, or at least try to make something happen.
It answers that question, because so many of our kids, especially in high school, and I'm sure you'll hear it in middle school too, say, you know, I don't understand the point of English. I don't understand the point of why we're having to do this reading and this writing. And this gives them the point.
And they don't see the connection, like there's a disconnect between the real world and what we do in school. This has a process that you can easily explain, this is what we're doing and this is why we're doing it. And it fits, if you're thinking college, this is definitely the language of college. If you're going to go out and get in a career field, you need to be able to make arguments, and you know, you want to go into marketing, you want to go to advertising, you want to run a business and you want to you know, advertise your business, you have to make an argument to the public. Okay, and if you can provide evidence as part of that argument, that's even better. If there are problems in your community that you need to fix, you can be part of that. If you have issues that you need to make decisions on, then you know how to go about gathering the evidence to make that decision. If you need to advocate for yourself, like, you know, you're going to have to maybe get audited someday. You're going to need to be able to pull evidence together and make a well-reasoned argument to try to convince somebody of believing what you believe or seeing it from your point of view. So there's a lot of connections, a lot of extensions, but yeah, I like to go back to that. It starts with the culture, and it works to this point, because by the time we get to community research projects, it's not something I would start the year with.
You have to work on the culture too. Yeah. I mean, you can't just teach. This is a paradigm shift in our country and in our classrooms, and the way that we were taught is no longer, and it's hard sometimes to shift from the way we were taught to this, and it takes a lot of time and effort.
Absolutely.
And working on the culture directly sometimes to say, these are expectations when you give feedback. You know, somebody had a poster in their room of accountable talk, and I'm going to go take a picture of it because I've seen that. And there are tools you can use directly with the kids so they know expectations.
My sophomores had never done this before they did this. And they were able to, I mean, the constant complaint in my previous teaching was that, well, I don't get good feedback. I didn't get good feedback from this person. What do I do? How can I even revise? I didn't get good feedback. But through the process of, it's multi-layered. Number one, you're getting more than one response. Usually I allow them to choose who they go to. If we get back the next day and I see that I don't have at least 3 for every student, like I'll sort it and I'll identify who I need them from. And I'm like, I'll say, if you've got that paper right now, who's got time right now to read one? This person has up the form, okay, let's give that one to that one. And I'll start directing to make sure that everybody gets to 3. And when we get to 3, I'll call it, and then we'll go and pull up the graphs. And I love to do the split screen here and show them what we're trying to do. And the other layer of it is coaching them on, if you didn't get the response you were hoping for, this is your next step. And when you feel like you're there, print off a draft and let's go sit down and come to me and let's talk about it. So there's all those layers of that workshopping process. I mean, it's just a really dynamic way to teach, and I've seen such an improvement in the way my students write, especially the drafts that come to me. Like, I don't have to do a lot of like marking up the page as much as I used to, because I'm not having to drill home those central core concepts, because they are helping their peers understand the central core concepts. Now I'm just reinforcing them and then working on like the deeper thought and the reasoning and making sure that the commentary is relevant to the evidence, that the commentary is connecting the evidence back to the claim and things like that. So it frees me up to do more. I hope that helps. Like, so by the time we get to this community research project, they're used to being assessed in this way. Obsessed too. We do a lot of time. I spend a lot of time on it.
Even how they've responded, it improves across the board.
Yeah. That is great. Yeah, they do fairly well. She uses good voice throughout her piece. Yeah.
But that's why more than 3 is better. And this is their first opportunity to do this. So if they get a really good response from somebody else in the classroom, the next time we run through it, it might be an opportunity to say, I might want to do what that person did. So this is, and I can't knock that. Like, that's where we're at. No, I know. Yeah.
You can say the growth.
That's where they're at.
Progression, right.
And I just need to be honest with that. That's where they're at.
Right.
Now where do we go next? How do we get better at that? But that was what I was trying to say here. This is quantitative, so I have like actionable data there. And then this is qualitative, where it was more for them. And I never pull up that bottom portion. That's just something for them on an individual basis, but I do run through the graphs that Google Classroom gives me.
So do you have 2 students sitting down with one paper at a computer with this form, talking through it as the peer reviewer enters the information? How does, this is what you get, but what do the students get? How do they get their feedback?
Okay.
I mean,
Here's one that I have that is similar to that. It's like questions, and I did a scale, but you could do it different ways.
But do the students
That's what they see.
get like, I don't know.
This is what they see. Like, let's say they have a paper in their hand, or they have it open, like somebody sends it to them email. They read it, they put in their name, the writer's name, and then they start answering the questions based on that person's paper.
And then, but how does the writer get?
Oh, at the end
results?
you can email Google Forms. You can email yourself results, and I have them do that, and then forward it to the person.
They can do that in Office 365 too.
So they would get, on this one ending, you got a 3. On this one, for this form, you could do it however you want to. You didn't have to do a scale 1 to 4. This matched with a rubric that I used for this.
But
So they would get an
somehow
email.
electronically you have it so it goes to both you and the student.
It automatically comes to me because I created it.
Yeah,
so when they
I knew
submit
that. I just didn't know
I
how
get
it goes to the.
But then we email it to
student
this.
writer.
Once they've
email
used it. I think that was your question, right?
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing about how does the writer get it to the peer person.
They have to make sure, at least for Google Forms, unless there's another way. The way I do it is they email, at the end it says, I'll email myself like a copy of these responses, and they forward that to the student.
They share it with
the peer. Okay.
It may be.
Okay, so this is my Google Classroom here. And I love it. I mean, you can personalize it, so we were playing around with. Have you folks ever seen that the Bat Dad videos online? It's this dad who films himself with his kids with a Batman mask on and calls himself Bat Dad. So we were playing around with those and making it. I had students making them, and I made a few with my kids. And so I can personalize it and say taught by Batman, and I got a little image of Batman behind it. But network's bogging down on me a little bit. There we go. So the sophomores and I just did this project with Pokemon Go. And I'm gonna try and open up the actual form as well. So I can assign the work there if students can turn the work in. But so this is what the form looks like when you're constructing it. You can see I have 167. So this is the same form that I sent out to get the graphs on the left-hand side that were just up. And you can click in and you can like change it. You have options for a short answer, a paragraph, multiple choice, check boxes, whatnot. So then I can just decide, and I ask for students first their first name and their last name and what class period, because that helps me sort the information so that they all end up in the same, like a grouping of rows. And then when I go to responses, it gives me a list of who's responded, but then right here I can open that up in a Google Sheet. And what I used to do, so here's all the raw data, and that can be overwhelming, but that's not what I'm showing the students. This is just the collection of everything for them, and I've sorted it by last name here. What that allows me to do then is I can just share it. You can make it available to anybody with the link, and then I post that link. In fact, I've got one here. Right down here, peer response number 1. They can click there and go to the data, and they can actually go in and I just have them highlight the rows that contain the responses for them, and the cells are closed, so they can't usually. I mean, they're not. One worry I had was, would they go and read what other peers got? It hasn't been an issue at all. And if it was an issue, the way I did it before was I would go in and I would highlight them, copy them, and then you can give them a private response in Google Classroom or on Edmodo and leave them the responses. It took me quite a while. It took me about 45 minutes to go in back and forth to do it. But as soon as I realized I could share a Google Doc or make it available to anybody with the link and just post that link and they could go in and get their own, our kids are narcissistic. They're worried about what people said about them. Okay, and I can use it to my advantage. They go right into that sheet. They highlight what pertains to them. They go post it into. I have them posted into the private comments on the assignment, and they kind of curate their own peer response entries, and they can go and that will actually show their growth as well. It'll say, here's my first bit of response. Here's what I got the second time through, and I can demonstrate growth when my teacher comes around or if my principal walks in. You know, they like that. But they immediately go, and in those responses I've got them set up, like even though they're in cells in a spreadsheet, if you go copy a row and paste it into the private comments, it takes out all of the cells and turns it into a paragraph. So if I remember to put a space after every period in my responses that I make in the form, it doesn't like all cram together.
When you say private comments, are you talking about inside their Word document, like inside their Google Doc, over to the side where it says comments, they put it there? Where
No,
they put it on Google Classroom.
Like here?
Yeah.
If you click on the assignment, and you click on a student, take a minute to come up. So there's here's his. He's curated them here. So private comments.
Where does the date go to do that though?
That's all they see. They see. In the teacher view, I see all the students. Right. When they click on the assignment, all they see is their paper and whatever is put in the private comment. But right down here, see, add private comment.
Right, but they don't see this screen because this is your screen.
This is my screen, but they see this. It's a private comment.
In the assignment, they can see that bottom and it has add comment for them as well.
Right. Okay. So the student and I can have a private conversation in that space that none of the other students can see. And then he's actually, he's gone through the process. He's even private commented link to his portfolio here. But the opposite of that is this, where this is a class comment. It's called a class comment. If they post it there, everybody can see it. So I just have to coach them through the difference between those two. But they go in and post their feedback, and then they use that to revise. But that's part of setting up the culture. I would invite you to really go explore, go to Extended Argument and explore the community research site. and I can answer questions on that. And I'm going to invite Middle Tennessee Writing Project mentors to kind of take over at the tables too and lead some conversations about what you're thinking about what will happen next in your classrooms. Work through your plans and what resources you might need for the project, but also what resources you might need about if you feel like your students need to learn something first before they would get to the project. And then I can answer those questions, and the Middle Tennessee Writing Project teacher leaders at the tables can answer those questions too. Okay?
Every Monday memo he sends out is something new about, literally, a new spotlight on technology, and we almost feel as if, oh, I've got to go explore that, oh, I've got to go explore that, I've got to go explore that, and it's just overwhelming.
There's so much time in the day, yeah. I mean, like, so you've got to teach full-time, 9th grade, 10th grade, as well as clubs and all that.
But I feel like for you, Sharon, and it sounds like you've already done this, Linda, and Linda would be good, they're at separate schools. And I'm out of the classroom. I work system-wide. But it sounds like for me, maybe one of the best things for you, and I need to do it too, even in my position, is to become familiar with Office 365.
And the Google Classroom.
Because it sounds like, well, would they give their other, or would they take the place? Or does Office 365 offer all the same features?
Yeah, we have Office 365, and it's all that what's
yeah,
that?
but I think we're missing parts of it. That's what Leslie was saying.
I went to about 10 different PDs on all these, and I still know the words. I still could use it usefully in the classroom. I feel as if all that time was wasted.
Well, maybe if you could focus on something like this, where it could be a tool for you, for the students to share their writing.
So one thing I would definitely say up front is that if someone wanted to incorporate argument or these mini units, or even the extended argument with the community research project, if you wanted to do that all on paper, it could very easily.
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking the whole time.
If you wanted to do it all on notebook paper, it could be done.
Right.
So that.
But I liked what you know. I wish I could do that.
Just pick out. I'm sure it took you a while to get to this point. You know, just pick out a few things at a time, rather than do nothing. Do something.
They did the PD on Google Docs, and it just was like a joke. I mean, like everybody came and going. What did they teach us?
But I would advocate that a teacher in a room full of students working with the students to figure it out and figure out many aspects of technology. Like my students teach me a lot.
That's a good point. Yeah, like how do you do this? Oh yeah,
and you just have to be open to have that. Like, let's figure this out together. If you see something, say something.
I mean, we get in there. We've got to go on Clever, Mayon, Power School, Use ELA. I mean, these are ones I've just used this week. Edmodo, Edpuzzle, all of those.
And see, a lot of those I use, and it just has to be relevant. Like Use ELA, that's where I picked up the tech set on Pokemon Go.
What does it look like for Morrison School? What does it look like for Morrison Community? You know, what do you see as being the issues or the topics or the things that need to be addressed here?
Do you use, have you used any of Kelly Gallagher's articles of the week? So that might be, like every week my kids get a different article, and a lot of the articles are kind of issue related. And so maybe, you know, as we feed them these different articles, they could go back through, you know, we read this article about people not standing for the national anthem.
Right.
That's an issue I want to address. Or we read this article about...
I'm sure you know the different like Scholastic magazines and stuff. I do Upfront magazine.
Yeah.
And every issue of Upfront
has issues.
Has, you know, the yes, the no, the, you know, and issues all throughout it. So we look at that period.
So maybe y'all could even start like an ongoing list of these are problems that we're seeing, and you could just like keep that list, and then when it comes time for the kids to start thinking about this, they've got their list right there. These are things we've already seen this year that are maybe bigger than our community, but probably a lot of them are relevant.
Right. So now what about the Kelly Gallagher articles? What are those?
Probably very similar to what you got with the Scholastic.
Okay.
And Vale Middle School also does a similar thing to what Kelly Gallagher did. Marty was just telling me about it earlier, except more on the middle school level. Okay. So you might want to just go to Vale, VALE, Middle School.
Okay.
And so that would give you like regular articles that you could give your kids, and a lot of those are going to be
under their site. Is it articles of the week?
And I think it says using Gallagher.
Oh, okay, using Gallagher.
The articles of the week, yeah.
And I think if it's still the same case, pretty much their paper's already written for them because it literally takes the article or whatever it is and divides it into pros and cons. They haven't done any work yet. Thank you for that.
She's amazing. I've never worked with a librarian who is on it
As an engaged in the classroom and
legit. Like most librarians
and ours usually gets stuck with doing all the computer stuff and maintenance and getting toner and stuff.
Not librarians. So my problem with starting this third semester, or the third 9 weeks, is I kind of want them to get into Antigone first, so I kind of make that connection between like Antigone and the project is really small. So that's time. But we also tend to miss so much school in January because of not this year. So I'm worried about this kind of bleeding over into the fourth 9 weeks, like giving it enough time for them to really do something special with it. But that's also like
the testing windows.
But maybe I'm only feeling that way because I just had this idea and I haven't had a chance to like
process it,
flesh it out.
Could
there are kids on there saying this is important history?
Because I don't know if you have like you have to do this much test prep. Could this be your test prep? Because that's
and I was thinking about that too at lunch. Like if I break this down into like the sections of it and associate each one of these sections with like the multiple choice students, and instead of like saving all the multiple choice right into the fourth 9 weeks, just kind of build it in here.
Especially like you were saying here when those questions are asking, which of these two does.
There's a lot that they can learn.
See, I don't think I'm going to do this with
But
everybody.
again,
I think I'm going to do this just with myself.
they learn things that are appropriate for the project that they're doing. My punctuation
With whatever that TN ready is going to look like from,
Because I feel like my AP gets tons of like real world writing, and just we're constantly writing.
Right.
And I don't feel that way with my sophomores as much.